Good day, farmers. Welcome to yet another episode of the Agribusiness Talk podcast. Today, we are covering the second part of the Reducing Post-Harvest Losses in Tomatoes podcast that we started last week. I am joined by Rawlings, our agribusiness expert. Welcome, Rawlings, and please go for it.
Thanks, Dela. Good day, our farmers, and let me dive in right away. Last week, we covered how to harvest tomatoes and how to maintain quality and at the same time reducing post-harvest losses. We also touched on transportation and packaging. So today we are covering tomato value addition. So we'll start off with drying tomatoes. Drying is really a basic form of processing. If farmers over-harvest, they can dry their tomatoes to preserve them and minimize post-harvest losses. And there are different ways of drying tomatoes depending on the varieties. And before drying your tomatoes, you need to dip them in boiling water for about 1 to 2 minutes, and the aim is to disinfect your tomatoes. Then after that, you can then sun dry your tomato, or even on an open air space, or you can also decide to dry using the artificial dryers. So these are the two ways of drying your tomatoes: open air drying and artificial drying.
What are the advantages of processing tomatoes, and can this be done at farm level?
Yeah, there are plenty. Processing tomatoes reduces post-harvest losses and results in products that last up to a year without spoilage. It also removes microorganisms that can cause spoilage, and it also ensures that tomato products are packaged in containers that prevent contamination. On the farm or in homes, tomato pulp can be processed as base for tomato juices, for tomato sauce, puree, and also pastes. You can also make tomato powder. So I'll touch on how you can prepare tomato pulp. When you are making tomato pulp, only select ripe tomatoes. Then wash your tomatoes and dip in boiling water for about 2 minutes to remove harmful microorganisms that will be on the tomato skins. Then you can use a pestle or mortar to pulp your tomatoes. Then remove skin and seeds by straining through a sieve, and then you can start off with a coarse sieve, then select a finer sieve. Then after that, your pulp will be ready for processing. You can then heat your pulp immediately to destroy microorganisms and enzymes. So heat really deactivates enzymes that can cause your tomatoes to separate into pulp and water during storage. You can then heat pulp over fire in a stainless steel or aluminum pan, and whilst stirring continuously. After all tomatoes are added, or after heating all the tomatoes, you can then let the mixture simmer for 5 minutes before making it into juice. If it is for future use, you can refrigerate. On tomato pulp products, you can make tomato juice by adding salt and lemon juice to tomato pulp. Tomato puree and highly concentrated tomato paste are made by boiling the pulp until the water evaporates, constantly stirring to prevent burning. This results in paste that is a dark red color, and salt can be then added to taste.
So you mentioned about tomato powder. How is this made?
There are a number of steps that one needs to follow. The first step is to select firm, ripe tomatoes that are red in color and ensure that your tomatoes are disease and mold free. The second step is to wash and sort your tomatoes. Step number 3, you need to cut your tomatoes into halves lengthwise to eliminate the liquid and the seeds. Number 4, after emptying, you then cut into slices of 6 to 8 millimeters thickness. The next step is to place your tomatoes in a solar dryer, but then cover with sort of a mosquito netting to prevent contamination. And for commercial production, you can decide to use commercial hot air dryers. Kg of tomatoes will yield about 40 grams of dry matter. The yield really depends on the residues and the drying process. Then the next step is to ground or crush the dry matter into powder. You can try a blender for this. Next step is to cool the powder at room temperature for about an hour. Then after that, you can then package and label your tomato product. You can also send samples for certification before selling to ensure it is suitable and fit for human consumption. And it is also important to ensure high levels of hygiene or high levels of good hygiene. Keep your final product in a dark place to reduce infestation by insects.
So let's go back to the issue of storage. Say I have harvested my tomatoes, but I do not have a ready market. Is there a way I can store them?
Sure, if tomatoes do not have a ready market, store in cool conditions to minimize spoilage or post-harvest losses. Different storage conditions are recommended for tomatoes at different stages of ripeness. For example, it is recommended that green tomatoes ripen at temperatures between 13.9 to 15 degrees Celsius after being cooled at 10 degrees Celsius for 2 weeks. And in general, store tomatoes at 12 degrees Celsius, and that's at also the humidity of 86 to 90%. And to minimize spoilage in tomatoes, wrap ripe tomatoes in plain green leaves. Change these leaves every 2 to 3 days until the tomatoes are sold. It is also important not to allow the storage temperature to fall below 10 degrees Celsius. Mature tomatoes can last for 2 to 3 weeks if stored in the right conditions.
Thank you so much, Rawlings, and thanks farmers for listening. I do hope you have benefited.
Thank you, Dela, for having me.